The Alpha King's blind son sat alone every day, until one Omega started reading to him. Birds often rested on the ledges. The wind carried the smell of pine forests and distant rain, but none of it reached him. The prince was born without sight, his eyes pale and unfocused, as if they belonged to another world. Some said it was fate. Others whispered it was a curse placed on the royal blood before his birth. No one dared say such things aloud near the Alpha King, so the court remained quiet. From childhood, the prince learned the sound of silence better than speech. He learned how footsteps changed when fear walked with them. He knew which servants spoke honestly and which smiled while hiding lies. He could hear truth in breathing, sadness in pauses, and cruelty in forced kindness. Yet knowledge did not ease loneliness. The prince's name was rarely spoken with warmth. He was the king's youngest son, but also the one least understood. His brothers trained in the courtyard, learning sword and command. His sisters studied diplomacy, grace, and court language. He remained apart, hidden behind stone walls and careful rules. The Alpha King loved him, but from a distance. The king believed strength was action, dominance, and control. His blind son seemed fragile, even though something deep inside the prince felt heavy, powerful, and restless. The king feared what he could not see or measure, so the prince was kept safe. Safe meant alone. Each day followed the same pattern. A servant guided him to the gallery. He sat in the carved chair near the window. Hours passed. Voices came and went, always careful, always respectful, never staying long. No one spoke to him unless ordered. The prince listened. He listened to bells in the city below, marking time he could not track by light. He listened to guards changing shifts. He listened to laughter far away, never meant for him. Sometimes he wondered what the world looked like, but more often he wondered what it felt like to be seen. The curse, though no one spoke of it openly, lived like a shadow in the castle. Old stories said the royal blood carried ancient power, something dangerous if awakened wrongly. The prince's blindness was said to be the lock that kept the power sleeping. Whether true or not, fear shaped every decision around him. He learned early that wanting too much brought silence. Asking questions brought long pauses and changed subjects, so he stopped asking. Instead, he built walls inside himself, stone upon stone. Until the day a new voice entered the gallery. It was softer than most, unsure but steady. The footsteps were light, hesitant. The prince noticed immediately, because new sounds always broke routine. "Your Highness," the voice said, careful and respectful. The prince turned his head slightly. "Yes, I was told to read to you." Silence followed. The prince felt something unfamiliar, curiosity. "Read?" he asked. "Yes," the voice replied, "if you allow it." No one had asked his permission in a long time. The prince nodded. "You may." The newcomer stepped closer. The prince could hear fabric move, fingers touching paper. A book was opened. "My name is not important," the voice said quickly, as if afraid to say more. "I am an Omega assigned by the court." The word Omega carried weight in the kingdom. Omegas were expected to serve quietly, to obey, to remain unseen. They held little power, yet carried deep emotional strength, though few recognized it. The prince did not comment. "Read," he said. The Omega began with a simple story. It was an old myth about stars falling into the sea. The voice was gentle, not dramatic but sincere. Each word was clear. As the story unfolded, something strange happened. The prince felt images form, not with sight but with feeling. The ocean felt wide and cold. The stars felt lonely and burning. For the first time, a story did not feel like sound alone. It felt like a door opening. The Omega finished the page and paused. "Continue," the prince said softly. So the Omega did. Minutes turned into an hour, then another. Neither noticed the time pass. When the bells rang for evening, the Omega stopped suddenly. "I'm sorry," the Omega said. "I must leave." The prince's chest tightened, though he did not understand why. "You will return?" he asked. "Yes," the Omega said. Tomorrow, if you wish." "I do," the prince replied without hesitation. That night the prince did not sleep easily. His mind replayed the sound of the Omega's voice, the rhythm of words, the warmth hidden inside quiet tones. Something long asleep inside him stirred. The next day he waited. And the Omega returned. Days passed. Reading became routine. The Omega brought many kinds of stories, legends, poems, histories, even forbidden texts hidden from the court. With each story, the prince felt his inner world expand. The Omega did not rush, did not talk down to him, did not pretend the prince was weak. Sometimes, after finishing a passage, the Omega would pause and say, "What do you think?" No one had asked him that before. The prince's answers were careful at first, then thoughtful, then honest. He spoke of loneliness, of silence, of hearing too much and being understood too little. The Omega listened without judgment. Slowly, something changed between them. The prince noticed the Omega's breathing when nervous. The Omega noticed how the prince's voice shifted when deeply moved. They learned each other in quiet ways, but shadows began to respond. The gallery grew colder when the Omega arrived. Curtains moved without wind. Old whispers echoed in empty halls. Servants felt uneasy but said nothing. The curse was listening. One evening the Omega brought a book older than the others. The pages were worn, the words were faded. "This story is dangerous," the Omega said softly. "I was told never to read it aloud." "Then why bring it?" the prince asked. "Because," the Omega replied after a pause, "it feels like it belongs to you." The prince said nothing. His hands rested on the arm of the chair, fingers tense. "Read," he said. The story spoke of a prince born under shadow, of sight taken to protect the world, of a voice meant to guide him through darkness. As the Omega read, the prince felt something awaken deep inside his chest, warm, heavy, alive. Then the Omega stopped. "The last page is missing," the Omega whispered. The prince's breath caught. He understood then. This was not coincidence. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. And in the quiet gallery, wrapped in half-light and ancient silence, the blind prince realized he was no longer truly alone. The next morning came slowly, wrapped in pale light and soft bells from the city below. The prince was awake long before anyone came for him. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands folded, listening to the castle breathe. The stone halls always spoke in low sounds, old echoes, distant steps, the quiet memory of power. But today something felt different. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. He was waiting. When the servant arrived to guide him to the gallery, the prince stood at once. His movements were calm, practiced, yet there was a tension beneath them, like a held breath. The gallery greeted him with familiar air and distant wind. He took his seat near the window, as always. Sunlight brushed his face, though he could not see it. Minutes passed, then footsteps, light, careful, a little rushed. The prince's lips parted before he realized it. "You came." "Yes, your highness," the Omega said. There was relief in the voice, hidden but real. "I was afraid I would be late." "You are not," the prince replied. The Omega sat nearby and opened a book but did not read right away. "About yesterday," the Omega began, unsure. "That story, it troubles me." "It should," the prince said quietly. "It felt like truth." The Omega inhaled slowly. "I think so too." Silence settled between them, but it was not heavy. It was thoughtful. Then the Omega began to read. Today's story was different. It spoke of a kingdom built on sound instead of sight, where people listened to the world to understand it. The prince leaned forward slightly, every word sinking deep. As the Omega read, the prince's mind formed shapes again. Not images, but feelings. Strong towers felt solid and cold. Voices felt tall or small. The world grew larger inside him. When the Omega finished the chapter, the prince asked, "Why do you read like that?" The Omega hesitated. "Like what?" "Like the words matter to you," the prince said. "Not like a duty." The Omega smiled, though the prince could only hear it. "Because stories saved me once. I think they can save others too." The prince turned his head toward the voice. "Saved you from what?" The Omega paused. "From being forgotten." That answer stayed with the prince long after the reading ended. Days passed, marked by shared silence and spoken words. The Omega came every morning now, bringing stories and questions. Sometimes they spoke of legends, sometimes of feelings the court never named. The prince noticed how his world changed around the Omega. When the Omega entered the gallery, the air shifted. Not darker, deeper. Sounds became clearer. His own thoughts grew louder, harder to ignore. He began to feel things he had buried long ago. Longing, curiosity. A strange warmth that frightened him. The curse noticed too. Shadows lingered longer in corners. Candles flickered without wind. Once, a book fell from a shelf without being touched. The Omega noticed these things and said nothing, but fear grew quietly in the Omega's heart. One afternoon, after reading ended, the Omega remained seated. "You should go," the prince said gently. "I know," the Omega replied, "but may I ask something?" "Yes." "Do you ever wish," the Omega said slowly, "that you could see?" The question cut deeper than expected. The prince thought carefully. "Sometimes, but more often I wish others could see me." The Omega swallowed. "I see you." The words landed softly, but they shook something loose inside the prince. He reached out without thinking. His hand moved through the space between them, fingers trembling. The Omega froze, breath caught. The prince stopped just before contact. The air grew heavy. Something moved in the darkness behind the walls, like a distant echo answering a call. The prince pulled his hand back quickly. "Forgive me." "No," the Omega said softly, "it's all right." But both felt it. The curse had stirred. That night the Alpha King summoned the Omega. The throne room felt vast and cold. The king's presence filled it like thunder held behind clouds. "You read to my son," the king said. "Yes, your majesty," the Omega replied, head bowed. "You speak often, only when invited." The king studied the Omega for a long moment. "You will continue your duty. But remember, my son carries more than weakness. Do not awaken what sleeps." The Omega understood the warning, yet the next morning the Omega returned. The prince sensed it immediately. "You were summoned." "Yes." "Are you afraid?" the prince asked. "Yes," the Omega answered honestly. "Then why come back?" The Omega placed a book down gently. "Because leaving would be worse." The prince closed his eyes. Inside him, something heavy and ancient shifted again, not with anger but with recognition. The Omega began reading a poem this time. It spoke of a flame that did not burn but warmed those who dared come close. As the words flowed, the prince felt a brief flash, light, sharp, and sudden. Not sight, but something close. A sense of form, of presence. He gasped softly. The Omega stopped. "What is it?" "I felt something," the prince said, "like the world leaned toward me." The Omega's voice shook. "The stories say connection can awaken what was sealed." "Are you afraid of me?" the prince asked. The Omega did not answer right away. Then, "No. I am afraid for you." The reading ended early that day. As the Omega left, the prince sat alone, heart racing. He understood now. The Omega was not just a reader. The Omega was the key. And if the story was unfinished, then so was the danger. After the night the prince first dreamed of light, sleep became a place of movement and sound. He no longer rested in still darkness. Now shapes formed behind his closed eyes, unclear, shifting, never fully visible yet filled with meaning. He dreamed of doors opening without hands, of voices calling his name without sound, of a flame that did not burn but waited. When morning came, he woke with his heart racing and his hands cold. Something had changed inside him. The servants noticed first. The prince no longer felt distant when they guided him through the halls. His presence seemed heavier, as if the air itself adjusted around him. Some servants felt uneasy and could not explain why. Others felt calm, as though standing near him eased old worries. The castle responded too. Walls creaked at strange hours. Shadows rested longer than they should. The wind carried whispers that vanished when chased. The Alpha King noticed. He watched his son carefully during meals, during council gatherings where the prince sat quietly beside the throne. The king felt it in his chest, something waking that should have remained asleep. So he ordered distance. "The Omega will no longer read every day," the king said one evening, voice firm. The prince's hands tightened on the arm of his chair. "Why?" "For your safety," the king replied. "And the kingdom S." The words felt like chains. "But the stories help me," the prince said calmly. "They steady my thoughts." The king's jaw tightened. "Power often feels steady before it breaks free." The prince said nothing more. He had learned silence early. That night the Omega did not come. The gallery felt empty again, too large, too quiet. The prince listened for footsteps that never arrived. Each passing moment felt heavier than the last. Inside him, something stirred restlessly. The next day, still no Omega. On the third day, the prince finally spoke. "I wish to go to the old library," he told the servant guiding him. The servant hesitated. "That place is rarely used, Your Highness." "I know," the prince replied. "That is why I want to go." The old library lay deep within the castle, far from the bright halls. Dust filled the air, and the smell of old paper and candle wax lingered. The servant lit a lamp and left the prince seated at a long table, alone. The prince ran his fingers over the wood, feeling the deep scratches made by hands long gone. Books surrounded him, stories no one read anymore. He reached for one. As his fingers touched the cover, the air shifted. A whisper brushed his mind, not a voice but a feeling, recognition. He opened the book. Though he could not see the words, something inside him understood them. The curse responded, unfolding gently like a thing long restrained. He felt heat, not painful but alive. Suddenly, footsteps echoed. The prince turned his head. "Who is there?" "I am," the Omega said softly. Relief washed through the prince, followed by fear. "You should not be here." "I know," the Omega replied, stepping closer. "But I was told to leave, and I could not." The prince lowered his voice. "The king." "I know," the Omega said. "But something is happening to you. I felt it." The prince swallowed. "I feel it too." They sat across from each other in the quiet library. The Omega placed a hand over the closed book the prince held. "This is one of the forbidden texts," the Omega said. "It speaks of the curse." "Read to me," the prince said. The Omega hesitated. "If I do, there may be no turning back." "There already is no turning back," the prince replied. The Omega began to read. The story spoke of an ancient line of rulers chosen not only to lead, but to guard the balance between power and restraint. One child in each generation carried more than others, a force that answered emotion, not command. Sight was taken to delay awakening. Isolation was used to prevent connection, but the curse was flawed because it could not survive love. As the Omega read those words, the prince felt the room tilt. A sharp flash crossed his mind. For a moment, just one, he saw, not clearly, not fully, but enough. He saw the Omega's outline glowing faintly in the dim light. He saw bookshelves rising like shadows. He saw his own hands trembling. Then darkness returned. The prince gasped, breath uneven. The Omega dropped the book. "What happened?" "I saw," the prince whispered. Just for a moment, fear and wonder filled the Omega's chest. "The curse is breaking." "No," the prince said slowly. "It is changing." Footsteps thundered outside the library. The Alpha King's voice echoed through the hall. "My son." The Omega stood at once. "I will leave." "No," the prince said. He stood too, unsteady but strong. "Stay." The doors opened. The king entered, eyes sharp, presence heavy. He took in the scene, the book, the closeness, the tension. "So it has begun," the king said quietly. "You knew," the prince said. "You always knew." The king sighed, the sound tired and old. "I knew what you might become, and I feared it." "You feared me," the prince said. "I feared losing you," the king replied. The Omega stepped forward. "The curse is not meant to destroy. It responds to care, to choice." The king looked at the Omega with new understanding and worry. Then you are part of it. Yes, the Omega said. I always was. Silence filled the room. The king turned to his son. If you continue down this path, your power will awaken fully. The kingdom may not survive it. The prince lifted his head. What if it does not need to be controlled? What if it needs to be understood? The king said nothing. That night, guards were placed outside the prince's chambers. The Omega was ordered away from the inner halls, but distance no longer worked. The curse had tasted connection. In the dark, alone, the prince placed a hand over his heart. He felt warmth there, not dangerous but alive. And somewhere beyond the walls, the Omega felt it too. The bond had formed, but it softened. When the prince opened his eyes that night, the world did not rush in all at once. There was no sharp light, no sudden clarity. Instead, there were edges, gentle shapes, quiet contrasts like dawn learning how to be morning. He did not move. He breathed. The room around him felt present in a new way. He sensed the space between objects. He felt where the walls stood, where the window waited. He could not see details, but he knew where things were, as if the world was slowly introducing itself. Tears slipped from the corners of his eyes, warm and silent, not because he could see, but because he was no longer alone inside himself. Outside his chamber, guards stood watch, uneasy. They felt something shift, like a deep note played beneath the castle stones. No alarm rang. No shout followed. Still, everyone felt it. The Alpha King woke before dawn, heart heavy with knowing. He stood at his window and looked out over the kingdom he had ruled for decades. He had always believed control was the same as care. Now he was not so sure. At sunrise, he ordered the guards away from his son's door. "Let him walk," the king said quietly. Inside, the prince stood for the first time without guidance. He placed his hand against the wall, then let it fall to his side. He took one careful step, then another. The floor felt steady beneath him. He smiled. When he reached the gallery, the light greeted him differently. It no longer felt useless. It felt patient, waiting. Footsteps approached. He knew them instantly. "You came," the prince said. The Omega stopped a few steps away. "I felt you wake." They stood facing one another. The prince could not see the Omega clearly, but he saw enough. A soft outline, a familiar presence shaped by warmth. "I can see a little," the prince said. The Omega's breath caught. "Does it hurt?" "No," the prince replied. "It feels honest." They sat together as they always had, near the window. For a while neither spoke. Words felt too small for what had changed. Finally the Omega asked, "What will you do now?" The prince thought carefully. "Choose." The Omega nodded. "That may be the hardest path." "Yes," the prince said, "but it is mine." The Alpha King entered the gallery then, alone, without guards or crown. He looked older in the morning light, but also lighter, as if he had set something down. "I see you differently," the king said. "So do I," the prince replied. The king approached slowly. "The curse was never just fear," he admitted. "It was love shaped wrongly. I wanted to protect you. I forgot to trust you." The prince stood. His movements were calm, sure. "I do not blame you. But I cannot live hidden anymore." The king looked at the Omega. "And you?" "I will not lead him," the Omega said gently. "I will walk beside him." Silence followed. Then the king bowed his head. "Then the kingdom must learn a new way," he said. News spread not through fear but through quiet truth. The prince would not be hidden. The curse would not be denied nor unleashed. It would be understood. Some feared change. Others welcomed it. But none could deny the calm that settled over the castle. In the days that followed, the prince trained, not with swords but with listening. He learned how emotion shaped power, how restraint strengthened it. When his feelings grew too strong, the world around him responded. When he centered himself, the air steadied. The Omega remained near, reading still. But now they also walked together, spoke together, questioned together. Sometimes the prince could see more, sometimes less. It did not matter. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in colors the prince could almost name, he stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "I used to think sight would complete me," he said. The Omega stood beside him. And now I know connection does. Below them, the city lights began to glow. The prince saw them as soft stars, blurred but beautiful. He reached out. This time his hand did not stop. Their fingers touched, brief, respectful, real. The world did not break, it breathed. The curse did not vanish. It changed shape, becoming something quieter, something that answered choice instead of fear. The Alpha King watched from a distance, heart full and aching, knowing his son had become something stronger than power. He had become whole. As night settled over the kingdom, the prince closed his eyes, not to escape the dark, but to rest within it. For the first time, the darkness held light, and the story, once unfinished, had found its ending.